From the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation, Outdoor Oklahoma.
Well, hello and welcome to Outdoor Oklahoma. I'm Todd Craighead. Today I'm joined by Jeff Boxrucker, our Assistant Chief of our Fisheries Division. And Jeff, you know, if there's one thing Oklahoma is known for, it's the diversity of fishing opportunities in this state. There's so many different types.
Oklahoma's been blessed with unique fishing opportunities, and paddlefish are one of the most unique.
Exactly. Now, I just read or heard recently that you, over 30 years ago, were involved in the very first paddlefish surveys in Oklahoma.
When I was a young biologist, I hadn't been working more than a couple years. I was asked to come up and help the crew run paddlefish nets on the Neosho River, and I'd never handled a paddlefish before, and I was really looking forward to it. It was quite an experience.
Well, I'm sure a lot of things have changed over that 30+ years in how we sample and what we've learned about paddlefish in Oklahoma.
You know, when we were on the river that first year, I don't know how many 60 to 80 pound paddlefish I handled, but there were a lot of them, and I even had one in my hands over 100 pounds.
Is that right?
Today, our paddlefish average in the 30 to 40 pound range, with a 60 pound fish being not so much rare, but not very common.
Sure. You know what I think is so exciting about paddlefish is that here in Oklahoma, we have more paddlefish in our rivers and lakes than anywhere else in the world combined. Is that right?
We do. We've been blessed with paddlefish fisheries on a number of rivers, a number of reservoirs, but there are still threats to that fishery.
Certainly.
And we have been monitoring that over the course of the last 30 years to try and get a handle on best management practices for that fishery.
Now, when you started back doing those first surveys, we actually had a commercial fishery where people could catch paddlefish and sell them.
We did. We had a commercial fishery on Grand Lake, within the lake. We also had the sport fishery at that time was limited solely to Miami Park. And that has certainly evolved over the years. Commercial fishing started blooming in the 70s and 80s, largely because there was a demand for caviar, because the worldwide sturgeon market had crashed because of overfishing. So there was a demand put on the paddlefish for their caviar, so commercial fishing increased. That put a fairly large strain on the population, and largely because of an outcry from sport anglers, we stopped commercial fishing in Grand in 1993.
So we have no commercial fishing in Oklahoma, but elsewhere there is commercial fishing.
There are commercial fisheries on paddlefish. Well, paddlefish their range is throughout the Mississippi River Basin. And there's a commercial fishery on the Arkansas River in Arkansas, the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers in Tennessee, Missouri River, the Ohio River. So many states have very viable commercial fisheries, but again, that affects their sport fishery.
That's right. Now, the way we sample, we kind of talked about how you did it back then. Has anything changed in that 30 years of how you sample?
It's funny how things change in 30 years. Yes, very, very much so. We still use gill nets like we used back then, but we have shifted our sampling to the lakes. We now collect the fish before they go on their spawning run. It's a lot less stressful on the fish, and we've learned about where to sample them best in the lakes.
Very good.
I think he may be a male too. Today we're up here on Grand Lake on the upper end, and we've set nets to kind of kill two birds with one stone. Throughout the winter we've been setting nets and doing a population estimate, trying to estimate the number of fish that are in Grand Lake. What we do is we mark them with jaw tags, and we'll set nets throughout the year, and by the number of recaptures that we get versus the number of total fish, we'll be able to estimate how many fish are in Grand Lake, which will give us an idea of how to manage this population. And we've also met the gentleman from the Tishomingo National Fish Hatchery, and we're collecting brood stock so that we can have some mommy and daddy fish so that they can produce paddlefish to stock into some of our lakes around the state and in other states. We from the Tishomingo National Fish Hatchery, we have had 3 reintroduction lakes. We've reintroduced fish on Ulaga, Eufaula, and Texoma, and supplemented some of our other stocks that we have around the state. So that's what we're up here doing today, and hopefully we'll go run some more net and let you guys see what we get in those nets.
Now, Jeff, would you say that probably the newest chapter in the story of the Oklahoma paddlefish is certainly now our research and processing center up in Miami?
That has been probably the single most important factor in us being able to develop a statewide management plan for paddlefish. The data we get at the RPC, we can get no other way. We, in our surveys, our gillnet surveys, we purposely do it so we don't injure and kill the fish. And to get the type of data we need to best manage the population, we need to get age data, which comes from jaws, so we have to cut them out of the paddlefish. And we also need to know a body fat content and a male to female ratio, which we can only get by sacrificing the fish. So the RPC allows us to bring to get data from voluntarily brought in by anglers, those fish that are donated to the RPC, which we get all this biological data from. And right now, it's the best in the world.
You know, it's a win-win for everyone because an angler brings his fish there voluntarily, like you said, and we'll process it for him free, right there on the spot. We, in turn, get all that valuable data that we don't have any other way to get.
We get the data, and we also process the caviar, the eggs into caviar, which allow us, from the sales of that caviar, gives us funds to put back into the program to manage the fish. And we're doing a lot more with paddlefish now than we were able to do previously because we have the funding now.
Now, what are some of those threats to paddlefish that that they've had to overcome over the years?
Well, I mentioned earlier that paddlefish are native to the Mississippi River drainage, and construction of dams along those rivers has been the single most damaging thing to sustaining those populations because paddlefish, being a big river fish, spawn on gravel shoals on these rivers, but the eggs are floating and they need to be able to flow downstream in this flowing water, and as soon as they come to a reservoir, they sink down to the bottom and the eggs die. So dams has prevented not so much paddlefish from spawning, but from the eggs from hatching.
Okay.
Which, in order to reestablish populations above these dams, we have to move into a hatchery program where we stock paddlefish from the hatchery above the dams that were created on these spawning rivers.
I don't think there's anything more cute than a baby paddlefish.
They are unique, aren't they?
Tuesday morning, we went out to Grand Lake at Gray's Landing to set out gill nets, 6-inch monofilament gill nets in the lake in known areas where the paddlefish stage to run up river this time of year. We were very successful and brought back 19 individuals, 9 females and 10 males that we'll use here at the hatchery to cross and make the next generation of paddlefish for the state of Oklahoma. Well, each fish was injected with hormone at the lake to induce ovulation or sperm production, milk production. And so this morning we checked all the males and they came off as usual. Males usually give up their milk before the females give up eggs. That's kind of nice because it gives us time to store that milk, to check it for motility and numbers, sort of grade it, and keep it in a refrigerator until it's to be used later when the eggs come off. That has been done. We're now waiting for the females to come off and expel their eggs. It's going to be several hours. We'll check them every few hours, and we'll just continue to check and take eggs every couple of hours until every one of them's done. We won't go any longer than 30 hours post-injection because it's been from our experience that they just won't produce viable eggs at that point. When we check our females, we'll check for ripeness of the belly. It has a procedure of softening, and then they'll begin to expel ovarian fluid, and then maybe the next step would be to expel a tablespoon of eggs or so. And typically these females are very fresh and are good specimens, so when we turn them upside down in the water, or just about the time you grab a hold of one, when she constricts, if she's ready, she will expel that teaspoon of eggs or a tablespoon of eggs right there in the bottom of the tank. That's a good telltale sign that she's ready. At that point, we will bring her up here by gurney. We'll place her in this tank beside me that will be used as an anesthetizing tank. And once she is sufficiently anesthetized, then we'll bring her over to these gurneys over here, these saddles. We will insert a freshwater hose into her mouth so that she can be breathing the whole time that we have her under anesthetic. And at that time, we'll wipe off her belly, spread it with iodine to reduce any amount of infection before we make an incision, about a 4-inch incision in her stomach cavity, and take the eggs out just by scooping them out. They'll be loose enough at that time that we can scoop them out. And then we will sew her back up, and then we will give her a final injection of antibiotic to reduce any infection in the animal afterwards. She will be sutured up. It will close up the skin around that, and then we will put her here on the hatchery after she's expelled her eggs for about 21 days to make sure that all of the hormone has been discharged throughout the animal, and return her back to the lake where she came from. That takes care of the mama fish. Then the eggs we will set aside in a pan, and we'll take so many mils of the male sperm and put over those one pan of eggs, maybe 2 or 3 different males. That sperm won't be activated until we add about 2,000 mils of fresh water. The water activates the sperm, and it has about 3 minutes to fertilize the eggs. That time we'll be stirring the eggs to get a good mix and ensure that competition from each male is equal. You don't get one super male dominating all fertilization in the pan. And so in that way we can get several different crosses, the most variability, genetic variability that we can from the number of males and the number of females. The Tishomingo National Fish Hatchery has been raising these paddlefish since the early 90s. And for instance, last year we raised a little over 20,000 fish. Those are fish that grew to 12 to 14 inches, then were coated wire tagged in the end of their snout to designate that they had been hatchery reared, and then released throughout the state. And we hope to raise as many or perhaps more fish to be tagged and released this year. The paddlefish is a very unique fish. It's a large freshwater fish in North America, and it dates back to prehistoric times. And you can take a look at this fish and see it's the way that the fins are set on it. It looks almost shark-like. It has a full cartilage skeleton. It's considered a non-bony fish. So that makes it really unique. And we just have a great treasure here in the state of Oklahoma. And we need to protect it and manage it to the best of our abilities and not take it for granted. And we're glad to be working with other agencies to help do that. We're here today to stock the last of Paddlefish 2009 year class paddlefish from the Tishomingo National Fish Hatchery. All told, I think we've tagged and stocked a little over 45,000 paddlefish this year. The lion's share went here to Eufaula Lake, about 38,000. I think we've tagged and stocked about 5,000 into John Redmond Reservoir in Kansas. And with any luck, those will come downstream and enter into the state of Oklahoma. And about 2,000 of those juveniles went up back to Grand Lake where we got some of the brood fish. We started this year in the spring by gathering broodstock from Grand Lake and Lake Fort Gibson, brought them back to the hatchery, injected them with hormone to release eggs, made the crosses there, raised, hatched the eggs, raised them up, and tried to optimize the space as best we could, and did a pretty good job of that this year, and raised the most paddlefish that we've ever had on station. So it was a bumper crop for us, and we're just glad that we could help to improve the fishing here in the state. Paddlefish is sort of a prehistoric fish. It's a non-bony fish, has a cartilage skeleton, and it's just a very special freshwater fish. Grand Lake represents probably the best population of paddlefish in North America and perhaps in the world. And so we're really blessed here in Oklahoma to have such a good resource of this special fish. And what we would like to do in working with the state of Oklahoma is to keep that, to ensure that we're blessed, and not just in Grand Lake, but in other lakes across the state. So we're just glad that we could be a part of the effort to propagate these fish successfully and to provide fishing opportunities for such a large freshwater fish here in this state.
Now, Jeff, how long will it be until those fish actually are of age where they can reproduce?
Paddlefish in Oklahoma mature at about 8 to 10 years old, which is much faster than they do in the northern states, where
Really?
we're talking 18 to 20 years old, which
Wow.
Allows our population to expand at a much faster rate than they do in other parts of the country.
Certainly. Now, there's probably some places that we have stocked that we're beginning to just see some reproduction now.
We are. We did some netting just the last few weeks down in Lake Texoma, and for the first time we think we found
Really?
natural reproduction.
Oh, that's great.
And it's very encouraging, and I'm sure that once we start looking at some of these other lakes, we'll see the same things there.
Oh, that's great. Now, what are some of those key elements or key ingredients into developing this management plan for paddlefish?
Well, certainly stocking, like we've seen, is an integral part of it, and our surveying that we've also seen is another very critical part. But the processing center also plays a vital role, because information from the center is where we get our exploitation, which is our angler harvest rates. We need to know that. We need to know what the natural mortality rates are, so we can set regulations to make sure that we're staying within the sustainable limits of harvest.
You know, the regulations are such an integral part of any kind of management on any kind of wildlife that people need to stay tuned, because it's likely that regulations could be changing often as we get new data.
We learn more about paddlefish every year, and the objectives of the agency and the biologists is, number one, to protect the resource, but at the same time optimize angler opportunity. So what we try to do is balance what's good for the fish, what's good for the anglers, and make it a win-win.
You know, I'm looking forward to the day when I can teach my daughter how to snag a paddlefish.
Well, tell her to hang on.
Exactly. Hey, thanks for joining us. For all of us at your wildlife department, I'm Todd Craighead. We'll see you somewhere new next time on Outdoor Oklahoma.